Hey, on this nice, lovely January Sunday, actually. It's quite nice outside. Don't take that for granted. January, so good to see you here. And as far as announcements goes, we don't have anything except for we always like to bring the gospel at home, which is something that Spiritists are invited to do, which is something that you connect with yourself and you can read a passage from the gospel every week. And if it's something that you need help with to implement in your home, please let us know, because we can help with that. We have volunteers who will for a couple weeks help out and do the gospel at home with yourselves, with you and your family. So yeah, please reach out if you'd like to implement that at home. And today we'll be talking about hope. I figure that's a good topic to start off the year, right? Very hopeful. And I'm just going to read a text for us to calm ourselves down. And it's a random text from the book The Way, the Truth, and the Life, Caminho, Verdade e Vida, from Francisco Cândido Xavier. And the text is number 50, called An Accounting of Himself. And here we have an interpretation from a passage from Paul to the Romans in chapter 14, when Paul said, "Such that each of us will render an accounting of himself to God." It is reasonable for people to devote themselves to solving all the problems having to do with the sphere that surrounds them. However, they need to know the kind of accounting they will have to render to the Supreme Lord when they finish the duties that have been assigned to them. Most people worry about people's destinies, yet neglect their own. There are those who fall into despair because they cannot make other people or certain institutions better. However, to whom do the patrimonial assets of the world really belong? The answer is clear. For the most powerful owners will have to leave the planet's economy behind to the new workers of God for the task of ongoing evolution. But this fact could raise certain questions in the minds of the less informed. If the accounting in question is related to one's personal circle, what has the person to do with the accounting of his or her family, home, or workplace? Hence, it is our duty to explain that family members, the possession of the home, and the purpose of the group where one works all belong to the Supreme Lord. But regarding their own accounting, people will have to explain their line of conduct towards their family, the home that shelter them, and the source of their daily activities. Of course, no one can answer for others, even so regarding the effort that concerns it. Each spirit will be compelled to explain the nature of its actions in the smallest areas of earthly life, where it was called to live. So let us join our hearts in prayer. And we can close our eyes and just take a deep breath so we can arrive here and settle in. And elevate our thoughts into our Master Jesus, our older brother, that light that comes to us. And in connecting with Jesus, we would like to thank Him for the opportunity of being here today. Being here today in a new year. And we ask Him that He can inspire all of us, that He can open our hearts to take in His teachings, His words, so we can better interpret them and hopefully apply into our daily lives. This leads us to our Father who we thank for giving us the opportunity of life, the opportunity of this reincarnation to be here together in community and in communion with God. And as always, we ask to be inspired by our guardian angels, by Christ, so we can all leave here a little bit better than when we came in. So be it. Very well. So, our topic today is talking about hope, and I'll be going back and forth with Portuguese sometimes, just to so we can understand a little bit of the interpretations that we'll be bringing. And to talk about hope, this is based on a talk from a fellow called Artur Valadares, who's a Spiritist from Brazil. His talk is called God of Hope. Passages from the Gospel of John, lots of passages from Paul. Then there's a couple texts from this book called Vinha de Luz, or Vine of Light. I haven't been able to find the version in English yet. And also another book from Chico Xavier, a book that I actually didn't know. It's called Speaking to Earth, or Falando à Terra, where we'll take a text for us to reflect upon hope. And to start us off, we're using a passage from Paul to the Romans, when he said, everything that was written in the past was written to teach us, so that through the endurance taught in the scriptures and the encouragement they provide, we might have hope. I really like this passage from Paul because it brings us the idea of how important hope is for our lives. He's literally saying that everything that was written to teach us, right, everything that's in the gospel, has two main purposes. One is to give us the endurance. In Portuguese, the translation says consolo, assistência, yeah, to help, like warm us, like a warm hug, basically. So it helps us on that aspect, but it also gives us encouragement. And when we feel endured or cared for, and we have encouragement, that gives us hope. That pretty much sums up what hope is. Hope can be that warm hug that helps us in difficult times, but also motivates us, encourages us to do something, to move, so we can get out of that difficult time that we're going through. So that's a passage from Paul telling us, why should we even talk about hope? Why is hope important? Well, because the scriptures or the gospel, one of their main purposes was to provide us with hope, to give us hope. And you know, when we're talking about hope, especially, if you hear a talk about hope from somebody who you might think, oh, he's got an easy life, so what does he know about hope? Right? That's why I brought Paul, because he didn't have an easy life. He went through quite a few tribulations in his lifetime, of many different aspects. Right? He was incarcerated, he was stoned, he was decapitated. So there were quite a few tough times that he went through, and in doing so, he was able to find the strength to keep going in hope. Right? So if he's telling us that hope is something that can help us get through difficult times, we can, I'd say, trust him. And so we give him more credit, because he actually not only needed hope, but he used it and he was able to succeed. And just to bring a little bit more even about hope and the importance of it, our dear friend Emmanuel, who was the Spirit, who through the medium Francisco Xavier wrote this book on, I believe it's chapter 75. He says that Jesus, in the condition of the divine master, knows that the apprentices will not always be able to get it right entirely. That mistakes are typical of our evolutionary path, of our evolutionary school. And for this very reason, hope is one of the sublime songs of his gospel of love. How comforting is it to realize that Jesus, when we are apprentices of Jesus, he is fully aware, he knows 100% that we are not going to get 100% right, that we are going to make mistakes. Right? He's saying here that mistakes are they're typical of our evolution, of our evolutionary process. And so, in doing so, in having these mistakes throughout our lifetime, hope is essential for us to keep going, for us to get through these difficult times. So much so that hope is one of the sublime songs of the gospel of love. That's how Emmanuel poetically talks about hope. So again, it shows us that, doesn't it comfort us to know that, Jesus doesn't expect us to get it right all the time. He doesn't expect us, and he knows we won't. And he provides in his gospel hope. He provides us the comfort that we need, and also the encouragement that we need to keep going. So we're not disappointing him when we make a mistake. On the contrary, it's an opportunity for us to use his teachings, to use his love, to get through it. So much so that he invited us in Matthew 11. He said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." Right? He invited the ones, all of us, right, that are trying but are not sometimes succeeding. He invites us all. And in this text again, Emmanuel says that faith is something that we work on to acquire. Faith is something that takes some time for us to fully embrace within ourselves. But he says that hope is available to everyone. Hope is something that it's a lot easier and quicker to acquire when we are in need. As we're working through building our faith, whenever we need that quick help, hope is always there for us. So much so that he says that hope is the light of Christians. Hope is the light of Christians. So hopefully this brings us an idea of how important hope is, that how much it can help and how available it is to all of us. And I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this. And so I invite you all to participate and share your thoughts, share your feelings, if you wish to. I'm not going to be calling out names, but I do invite you all to participate. And so the topic is finding hope in God's creations. So where can we find hope, right? Where can we find this inspiration to feel hope? And we don't have to go far. We can start by things that are pretty simple, by looking at nature, for example. Right? If you start to observe, we just went through a pandemic, so at times we needed some hope, perhaps, when things were a little grim. And sometimes just looking outside, seeing birds flying in the sky, or seeing flowers, or seeing something related to nature, that sometimes gave us hope. That's all we needed. All we needed was to look outside, so we can start to see how much of how hope is available. We don't have to look very far. And the other observation around nature especially is that darkness, when we think about the nighttime, that the sun will always rise during the start of the day. So that's a certainty that we have, that light will always come. No matter how dark the night is, light will always come. The sun never stops shining. What moves actually is the earth, but the sun never stops shining. And even in the darkness, we still have the light of the moon. We still have the light from the stars. And in the stars, now we can start to reflect a little bit about our lives and see what are these stars that can give us hope when we're going through tough times. Is it the friendships that we have? Is it our partners? Is it our family? Is it a text that we have from a good spirit? Is it a prayer? Is it talking to God? Is it talking to Christ? What else? Is it
A pet.
a pet? Absolutely. A pet. Right? It's a creation of God. Right? A pet can be a great source of hope. You know, not all is lost when you see them always cheerful. Right?
Smile of a stranger when you're having a bad day.
There you go. See, it doesn't take much. A smile of a stranger. Right? A laughter of a little baby or a child. Right? And we start to realize that there's so many things that can give us hope. Right? We're not unsupported. On the contrary, we have a lot of support. So we start to see, wow, there's actually quite a few things that can give us hope. And just like the light of the sun shining onto our homes, the light is always shining on our home, but is up to us to open the window to let that light come through. So all these ways of hope that we can find around our life, they only work if we let them in. Right? How many strangers in the street might smile at us and we don't even notice, or we take it for granted, or we don't really take it in, right? But if we're open to it and we take the meaning and we let it go inside our hearts, then it can actually give us hope, right? So the same with, for example, the sun, the light of God. It's always shining on us. Now, it's up to us to open the window and let it shine within us. And it's interesting because the light, no matter how powerful the sun is, it will never open that window for us. It will never open that window for us. That's our job. That's our effort to open it and let it shine. You might see the light through the sides and through the creeks, but you can opening that window is always our job. And in challenging times, now I want to take this reflection a little bit to the experiences that we've had through our lives. In challenging times, I like to reflect upon how has Spiritism helped us through those difficult times. If we can, we don't need to share it, but if we can, if you want to, please go ahead. But if we start thinking about things that happened in our past and seeing, if it happened in a time when maybe I wasn't as connected with Jesus, or I didn't know Spiritism, and now that I do, how has that helped me go through my difficult or my tribulations in life?
I have an example.
Please, Mary.
As everybody, I had a few times. One that was very strong. I was going to the Spiritist Center back to Brazil I was very every week, everything. And outside of myself, my work environment, my personal life, everything was becoming a
Chaos.
completely. And then by my connection to
Mhm.
the Spiritist doctrine, I'm not
Yeah.
sure if it's correct.
Yeah.
Then I started going back to inside of myself and said, okay, if outside is a chaos, I'm going to forget outside,
Mhm.
deal with as much as I can,
Mhm.
but not actively. I will do like actively, that I mean is like taking any action, extra action,
Mhm.
just waiting for whatever it's around
Mhm.
come to my way the way it was while I was treating my inner
Mhm.
balance.
Mhm.
And okay, so I will do my best. I will do my job the best way I can. I'm
Mhm.
going to take care of my health the best I can. I'm going everything internally
Mhm.
as much as I can. And as a miracle,
Mhm.
everything started getting better, not only for me, but for everybody else.
There you go.
So obviously there was part of my responsibility in that
Mhm.
chaos, but the part that was not my direct responsibility,
Mhm.
by going to inside of myself again, then I could contaminate people around, and then that chaos, it contributed. Maybe it was not the only reason, but it
Mhm.
contributed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that. That was really nice. And yeah, there's so much from that we can talk about, and we'll actually use Paul to see exactly what you just said. We'll use some passages from Paul to talk about that. And you know, in what you described was the importance that a lot of what we learn from Christ and from Spiritism is to work on ourselves and the things that we can control, and that things around will eventually get better. Sheikh Xavier used to say, right, everything will pass. What can change is how we deal with the situations, how we deal with the problems, right? When we read, especially the gospel, it never promises us that if we are following the gospel or if we're learning the gospel, that problems will just go away. It never promises that we will have a life without problems. That's not the purpose, that's not the idea. But the idea is that when problems do come, we can deal with it. We can deal with them a lot better. We can find our inner peace, even though the surrounding is sometimes chaos, but we can try to hold that inner peace, and that's what we get from Spiritism. That's what we get from the gospel, right? It's not trying to control the outside, but rather, in a way, accept the outside and change what we can't control, right? And that's what hope can give us. Yeah, please go ahead.
So building on that, and
Yeah.
on your exceptional point, thought just came into my mind, and I just accept these are all Spirit's thoughts now that I can appreciate it a little bit more. I just embrace it. But there's a Muslim poet whose name is Rumi, who once wrote, he wrote a ton of stuff, but he wrote a beautiful passage about searching essentially for God. And he says, I went up to the mountaintops, I looked for him there, and he was nowhere to be found. I went into the valleys, I looked for him there, he was nowhere to be found. I went into the deepest mosques inside the cities, and he was nowhere to be found. And then finally, I'm not doing it justice at all. It's a much more beautiful than what but to give the gist of it, he said, finally I looked for him in my own heart, and I realized he was there all along. And so just building on your own point, that kind of echoes what you're saying about this idea of hope, and that really hope resides in us whenever we want it to, the moment we want it to, and building on that. Another thought, I love this idea of the sunrise that you kept referencing, because I think it's so apt. And something I recently received as, again, a spirit thought that I was so grateful for. I always used to think of that as well, the idea that the dawn will always come. And I got a thought, he's like saying that, the thing is though, you do realize the dawn is always coming. Like it's actually literally always coming. And if you actually think about it, that's true, because now that we live in the world that we do, which is so interconnected, the sun is always actually rising. Always, somewhere. It is literally always rising. Yes, the sun, the light is always starting. Yes, exactly. Even though our perspective may be darkness, it is showing up somewhere.
Yeah.
And while on the earth, well, now we can with Google Earth and everything, we can see the sunrise constantly if we want to, but in our own lives, what we can also do is realize it's always there. All we got to do is turn to it.
Yeah.
In that moment, this idea of consoling hope, it's available to us at all moments and in all moments. And to speak to your point about how Spiritism adds to that, the humbling realization of that connectivity is so gracious. A mathematician talking about infinity, I heard once say, and that to a mathematician is essentially what I would call almost their godlike. It's the endlessness, the constancy, the foreverness. And they said, in contemplating something so big, you realize how small you are, but in doing so it makes you bigger. And I feel faith is exactly that, this recognition of Spiritism and the connectivity it offers. It's in realizing just how so tiny I am, yet as part of this massive, glorious thing that God has created, I become bigger, and there's a sense of hopefulness in that. So anyways.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
There's a sense of humility too.
Yeah, absolutely,
To
thank
know
you.
how small we are and at the same time how big we are.
Exactly, especially when we start to, hope starts to come out of us. Like we were so hopeful that we inspire hope around us, right? That's becoming bigger and bigger, right? Because now
And
we're
the funny thing is doing nothing.
yeah,
The
it's funny,
outside,
right?
and that's the funniest part.
True. Thank you, and yeah, thanks for that, for sharing that, Attila. Especially the part around like the sun is rising.
Yes. Always.
Always, like somewhere on Earth right now.
Yes.
It is rising. It is like that. So thank you. And when we think about New Year's, a lot of times, a lot of us want to do those resolutions for New Year's. For some people that's really motivating. For other people that can be a little bit of a downer, because that reflection can cause them to think, well, I'm not good enough, so I need to do this, and this can bring some of us down. So I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about a little bit of the opposite. In the reflection of realizing how far we've come, how much we have accomplished so far in our lives. Especially thinking about how we deal with problems. How did we deal with problems 10, 20, 30 years ago? How are we dealing with problems now? Are we, when we are faced with problems, are we perhaps a little bit more patient? Are we a little bit more hopeful? A little bit more serene? Like how far have we come? How much have we evolved already in a lifetime, which is not a lot of time to begin with? And if we're able to reflect, and if we're able to find some of these changes, some of these good changes that we have gone through, when we see that, like, oh, actually, in this thing that I went through in life, I actually showed a little bit more patience. I actually showed a little bit more compassion, a little bit more hope, a little bit more serenity. In doing so, in realizing that we were able to achieve that, that can give us hope, can it? When we realize that, oh, actually, I did this right. It gives us hope to keep going. So, to go back to what you said, we don't even have to look outside to find hope. We can just look within and see what we've done so far and find hope there. So really, literally, hope is everywhere, as long as we're willing to see it, to look for it, and to see it when it's there. And since we're all God's creations, right, He wants us to feel hope. He wants us to feel loved. He only wants the best for us. So those are a few reflections around hope and finding it around us. Yes.
Yeah, I just would like to add a comment about what you just said. Sometimes we are very concerned about to look outside, and unfortunately we have this bad habit to compare ourselves with others.
Yes.
And this is not good because we are not open to what we really are. It's very healthy when we compare ourselves to what we are now, what we were before, and see how much we grow, how much we progress. But it's not healthy. Look others and say, I would like to be like him or her. I am not able to do what he or her do. So this is not health, because we are always thinking that the others are better than us. And that pushes us back down. You know, we feel that we are not enough, and this is not right. We are enough. We are unique, and we have our own pathway. And compare ourselves, like we are starting a new year. What I have done last year that makes me better now, today. This is very good, because it's important for us to evaluate how we are getting better and better, and plan to be better in the future. Right? So this is good, but not the contrary.
Absolutely.
So it's important to do what Mary said. Go inside of us. Go in our inner. Check what we really are. And things outside will get better because we are better.
And just to add to that too, I think that especially nowadays with so many, we get bombarded messages. If you think about the material world, about where we should be, what we should be doing, what makes us people of value, and so I think more now than ever, you know, it's important to, I think, use hope to find strength in those moments, to understand what to keep outside and what you define for yourself, because it's all kind of fabricated, these rules, right? And so whether it's comparing yourself to others or comparing yourself to what society says you need to be, it's just not very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Lucas. But yeah, absolutely, because I bet 20 years ago or 30 years ago, the circle of comparison that we had, or maybe our family and our friends, but now it's basically the entire world. We're seeing how the entire world lives, and you know that the comparison is a lot, can be a lot more present, and especially when we don't know the person, especially when we're home looking at pictures, we don't really know what goes on in their lives, right? So thank you all. The comparison piece is something that I hold dear to my heart, something that I've been working on quite a bit, so thank you for bringing that, because it can be a rabbit hole. So let's look at what we've done, what we've accomplished so far, and find hope and find strength in there to keep going. And it's interesting to think about, we see this, you know, if you watch movies about Christ or if you read the gospel. And actually an example of Paul that we can, I don't know why I looked there, Paul's not there. I was trying to point to the gospel. This is Jesus. Yeah. I need to get one of Paul. But yeah, that's not Paul. But the gospel here we have, you know, if you look at the gospel, the thickest part is Paul's letters, and in the book Paul and Stephen, Paul is describing how when he went to a Christian church, a church where they were preaching about Christ, you know, he could see There were a lot of people listening. There were a lot of people sick that were there to find help. And Stephen, who was the person preaching that day, had, a lot of things that he had to deal with. He had the sick to care for. He had those that wanted a kind word, so he was there preaching. They were probably having issues with supply. I'm sure they didn't have medicine for everybody because they didn't have a lot of money. So there were a lot of things that he was dealing with, yet he was very peaceful. He was very serene. He was smiling. He would, when somebody new would come in, he would take the time to talk to them and be very gentle and compassionate. And Paul couldn't understand how, amongst all those issues, he could still keep that serenity, keep that peace. And we hear that from others as well, which is kind of in a way that we can think of how what's in it with disciples that makes them almost like invincible. It's like no matter how hard their lives are, they still keep that peace, that hope. They can still keep that serenity. And so, for Paul, it was this example. There is another example that I brought, which is someone who's called, I didn't know him, he's called Ignatius of Antioch, or in Portuguese, Inácio de Antioquia, who was a follower of Christ who lived around the time of Paul as well. And he was preaching about Christ, and just like Paul, he was sentenced to death. So he was brought to Rome, and that's where he had his sentence. And during that time, when he was about to be decapitated, at that time, they used to stand tall and go to a place that was taller than the crowd, so all the crowd could see what was happening. So as he climbed on top of this platform, he was looking at Rome, and he was seeing all the beauty that Rome had. He had like the 7 peaks around home, and he had all those constructions and how beautiful Rome was. And he started smiling. And then the guard next to him, that was about to kill him, he said, I'm about to kill you. How are you happy? How are you smiling? How are you in peace? Right? That to him didn't really make sense, right? And again, that's another passage that shows us how those who have Christ in them, it doesn't matter what's happening around them, they can always feel that inner peace, because their peace is based not on the surroundings, but it's based on Christ. It's based on what we call the divine laws. Those are the assurances that we have of the fact that everything that's happening in our lives is for our improvement, is out of love, is not out of hatred. And the guard, right, that was about to decapitate poor Ignatius, when he asked, how are you so happy when this is about to happen? And Ignatius said, well, look around. Look at all the beauty that is around you all. And if Christ allows you to have all this beauty, to see all this beauty, even though you don't know him, even though we don't believe in him, can you imagine the beauty that we can see, that we can have when we believe in Christ, when we have him in our hearts? And that's exactly what he was seeing. He was seeing beyond just what was around him, but he was sustained, and he was grounded in the love of Christ, who's always there, and it's much more beautiful than anything on earth that we can see or touch. So much so that our good friend Emmanuel, also in the same book, he says that Jesus came into the world to turn on the light of the heart through the power plant of God's love. Translation didn't quite work here. Sounds better in Portuguese. But basically saying that Jesus came here to connect our light bulb with the power plant that is God's love. Basically to take, the cord and bring them together to connect our heart with the love of God.
Like Back to the Future.
Yes, exactly. That's what Christ's trying to do. Exactly. There you go. See, now I won't forget it. Now I won't forget it. I'll keep that image in my mind. Exactly. Very true. And I don't know if I have time. There's another passage that I bring from Paul as well, which is a passage when he was going, I believe, to Corinthia with Silas, who was a person that walked with him. While he was preaching, people didn't like what he was preaching, so he was sent to jail. And during the night, they were all incarcerated in this prison, and during the night there was a bit of an earthquake that opened all the doors of the cells, of the prison cells, and all the prisoners were able to escape, to get out of their cells, including Paul and Silas. And the guard of the prison later on woke up and saw that all the cells were empty, all the doors were open. And he was like, oh my God, what's going to happen now? If somebody's going to kill me, or something's going to happen to me, right? He's in trouble, right? If it's not the prisoners that are going to come to me, somebody else will. So in that moment, he was feeling really bad, and he decided to take his life. And then he overheard down the hallway someone tell him, "Don't do this. Don't kill yourself. Come here." And then the guard went, and it was Paul calling him, still inside the prison. So it was Paul, it was Silas, and all the prisoners. They were all there. They were all there with Paul, talking about Christ. So in that moment, if you think about prisons, especially almost 2,000 years ago, you can imagine how it was. All the prisoners, they had the opportunity to leave, to run away. Yet they decided to stay in prison because there with Paul they had found, I guess, what they were really looking for, something that they can't really find outside. But there with Paul, they found Christ. They found that something that was actually quenching their thirst that they couldn't find outside. So again, it just comes to show how powerful the love of Christ can be if we choose to let it in. And again, we're still learning from Paul. We're still using him, and especially in this passage from the Philippians chapter 4. Here is where we can explain a little bit what you're alluding to a little bit, Marion. Because Paul is a great example of a life that changed drastically, as he'll tell us. He says that I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. Right? We know when we read about his life that at times he had plenty, at times he had nothing, but he still persevered. And he's saying then that he learned to be content whatever the circumstances are. So he's telling us that that's possible. It's possible that we can feel that inner peace, that we can feel hopeful, that we can feel better regardless of the surroundings. Right? We're able to achieve that. He says that I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. And it's interesting to reflect the fact that, this is not only about money, for example. This is not about money or food. It can be about health. It can be about relationships. It can be about many things. Sometimes we have a lot of friends around us. Sometimes we don't as much. Move to a new country. Sometimes we're lacking a few friends after we move. And the interesting thing that Paul is telling us here is that in every situation, there's something for us to learn. For example, when we have plenty, when we have a lot, right? We're still being tried. We're still having opportunities to learn. For example, learn humility, learn discipline, learn. What was the other one that I had?
Charity.
Yes, thank you. Charity and balance, right? How to balance it. Right? For example, when we have, let's say, a lot of food around us, or a lot of money to spend, are we balancing it out? Are we taking what we really need, or are we going overboard? And then, when we're lacking, that's an opportunity for us to learn about patience. It's an opportunity for us to learn about faith, about confidence, about hope. Thank you. Exactly. Right? So it kind of shows us that no matter what we're going through, there's always an opportunity to learn. And maybe that was the key that Paul said, that he's able to feel content. Because he doesn't see the problem itself, but he sees the opportunity to learn, the opportunity to grow, the opportunity to keep going. And he had, I bet, quite a few times of troubles, especially when he was, braving through the wilderness to go preach about Christ, right? Sometimes when it's a little bit cold outside, or if it's snowing, you decide to stay home because we don't want to go outside. Can you imagine what Paul was going through, right? He didn't even know, where the next gas station was for him to grab a snack, right? He didn't know where he was going to have water, where he was going to have food, if he was going to find friends or thieves along the way, and he did. Right? But he always had that power to keep going, right? And that's the hope that we started the talk with, right? That's the hope that helped console him, whatever it was that he was going through, and also encourage him to keep going. So much so that in the end, he says the famous, I can do all things through him who gives me strength. He was able to find the strength in Christ. He was able to open his heart to the light that was shining every day. Right? He was able to have that energy from Christ to help him keep going, keep moving.
You can't imprison a heart that's been liberated.
There you go.
It's liberated through Christ.
Yes.
And this goes back to the earlier parable or story you shared about Paul being in the prison cell. It could be anywhere and be free because once you're liberated through Christ, then everything else just becomes, circumstantial.
Yeah. Exactly.
And actually, this gets to another idea that there are those who say in Buddhism when you're looking for enlightenment, there are those who say it really just boils down to one thing, attachment. And all of the various eightfold paths to achieve enlightenment are ultimately to teach us or to allow us to get to a place where we give up attachment, and whether that be attached to things or attached to the lack of things, and the anxiety and fear that comes with that. It's once that we give all that out, that all those exceptional virtues that you share, through that hope of the possibility of change can become manifest, whether that be charity, whether that be devotion, whether that be benevolence, all of these things. So exactly. It's actually beautiful. I find that maybe all these faiths really are just saying the same thing.
Yes, we're trying to get to the same destination.
Exactly. We just are all on different taxi rides, So.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, thank you. And what you said, like that enlightenment, where you can't really imprison a freed heart, right? That was Paul's contentment. It doesn't matter what he went through. That heart was always content. And I'm going to skip a couple things here from Paul. And, let's talk a little bit about the gospel then. Let's talk a little bit about action. So Christ told us in John chapter 8, and this verse comes right after that passage from, if you remember, when Jesus is at a square, and then it comes an adulterous woman who is thrown on the ground, and then people went to start stoning her, and Christ gives them a reflection, and she's not stoned. And So right after that passage, Christ says this, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And, we've talked a lot about light today. We talk a lot about hopefulness. And Artur brings us a reflection here that Christ said, whoever follows me. And in following is an action, is an effort. Right? It's not waiting for it to happen, but it's actually following Christ. Right? Following Christ requires movement, requires effort, requires us to do something. And Artur was talking about how, the gospel is really, one of its purposes, like we talked in the very beginning, is to console, right? To bring us that consolation to our hearts. But it's also to make us a little bit uncomfortable in the way that in learning more about the gospel, it opens our minds to more duty, more responsibility, more things that we can do with our life. So at the same time that it's consoling our heart when we're going through tough times, it's also motivating us and encouraging us to go and do something. Right? That's why Christ said, whoever follows me will never walk into darkness. That's why Christ invited all of us, right? Oh my God, I just said this before and I forgot now. Come to me, right? All you who are weary and burdened, right? Come to me, right? So he's always inviting us to act and to follow him. So that was just a snippet about the gospel, and I wanted to end with a few things from the book Vine of Light, and also a book called, like I said in the beginning, Speaking to the Earth, from Francis Xavier, and the Spirit who brings that message. It's a message that's called Hope. His name is Viana de Carvalho, who used to be a very active Spiritist in Brazil, and now, as a Spirit, he brought messages through Chico Xavier, who brings a lot of messages through Divaldo Pereira. And in the text when he talked about hope, at the very end, he said, hope, says the night, the day will return. Hope, cries out the seed, the fruit will not be long in coming. Hope, announces the justice, and I will restore everything. Blessed, then, are those in the world who know how to learn, how to serve, and how to hope. So we can see how present hope is in all these texts that we get from Spirit. It's truly that force that helps us keep going in trying times. As we reflected from before, we can find it in so many places around us. All it takes is us asking for it and be willing to see and be willing to listen. And to end, I came across this text a few nights ago when I was reading this book, Vine of Light, again, when Emmanuel is giving a reflection about Christians. He's talking about how after Christ that gave light to Christianity, gave light to Christians, and he said that the Christian do not appear on earth to confine himself or herself to the little house of the personality. He appeared with the Master Jesus, so Christians appeared with the Master Jesus to transform lives and perfect them with his own existence, which under the inspiration of the Divine Mentor will always be a song of service to his fellow men. So this is an invitation of how much we can find hope in helping others as well. There's a passage from Chico Xavier, who, he also went through quite a few tough times in his life, and he said that when he was feeling down, when he wasn't feeling so great, for whatever reason, Emmanuel would come to him and tell him, go to this, there was a couple neighborhoods in the town that he used to live that were tougher neighborhoods. There were a lot of problems there with hunger, with criminality as well. So when Chico was feeling down, Emmanuel would invite him, go there and talk to those people and listen to their stories and help them. So he would go, he would bring food, and he would go into their homes and talk to them and help them with food, but also with a helping conversation. And Chico would always come back feeling much better, feeling very hopeful. Because it always helps, not only when we're helping others, but also when we're seeing what others go through. It makes us realize that we're not alone, that everybody goes through tough times. And a lot of times it makes us realize that it's actually not as bad as we thought. There's other people that are going through a lot more than what we are. So it certainly helps put things into perspective for us. Ending with exhaling the glorious and endless love towards the kingdom of heaven that begins invariably, and this is where I love, within ourselves. Right? So that kingdom of God, related to both what Mary and Angela said, the kingdom of God begins invariably within ourselves. And that's where it is. That's where it begins. And from there, we can always make it grow and grow. So that's all I had to talk about hope, and I really appreciate your guys' help. It's very helpful to have a conversation rather than just me blabbing. So thank you. And if you have any questions, comments, or anything else, please. Thank you. And I forgot to welcome everybody online as well. Thank you for being online and for participating. And it was really good to have you all here, and Happy New Year to all of us. We are going to end in a quick prayer, and then we'll go to our passes. So may we close our eyes in this moment, and in the realization that Jesus' love is always shining upon us, we ask you, Christ, that you help us open the window to our hearts so that light can shine brighter and brighter within us. And that in doing so, we can also shine our light onto others and others, and create this endless sharing of your light, of your love, so we can feel our communities, our humanity grow fonder, grow more compassionate, more peaceful, more loving, and as we learned, more hopeful. Thank you, Lord, for all the opportunities and all the help that is available around us. And we really ask you that we can humble our hearts so we can accept the help. And together make this world a better place. Thank you for your guidance, for your inspiration, and for this opportunity of being here in community and communion with you. Thank you, and so be it.